Good morning. The Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee will please come to order. Today we are having a hearing on retirement security, and this is the first this committee has had since 2013. So I want to thank Ranking Member Burr for working with me to hold this bipartisan hearing. Senator Burr and I will each have an opening statement, and I will introduce our witnesses. After they give their testimony, senators will each have 5 minutes for a round of questions. Before we begin, as usual, I want to walk through the COVID-19 safety protocols in place. We're all, again, grateful to our clerks and all of our staff who's worked hard to get this set up and help make sure everyone stays healthy and safety. We will follow the advice of the attending physician and the sergeant at arms in conducting this hearing. Committee members are seated at least 6 feet apart, and some senators are participating by video conference. And while we are unable to have the hearing fully open to the public or media for in-person attendance, live video is available on our committee website at help.senate.gov. And if you are in need of accommodations, including closed captioning, you can reach out to the committee or to the Office of Congressional Accessibility Services. Even before this pandemic wreaked havoc on our nation, it was clear our economy didn't work for a lot of working families, and too many people in Washington State and across the country were struggling just to get by, let alone plan for the future. Calculations from the World Economic Forum found that the gap between what our country is saving for retirement and what people will need was $28 trillion in 2015 and would be $137 trillion by 2050. In 2016, over 500,000 full-time workers in Washington State worked for an employer that did not offer a retirement plan. Only 1 in 3 workers in our country is saving enough to retire comfortably, with the average worker on track to have their standard of living cut by 1/5 in retirement, and the situation is even worse among women and workers who are paid low income. And it's not just people's financial futures that have been in jeopardy. In 2018, the Federal Reserve found almost 40% of Americans said they would struggle to come up with $400 in an emergency. An historic pandemic that causes millions of lost jobs and millions of people to be forced out of the workforce to care for their families is exactly the kind of emergency people cannot afford. That's why we took action in our relief bills so people could draw on retirement savings to weather the storm without being penalized, and to provide direct financial assistance as well, since helping people access their retirement can only go so far when 1 in 4 people in our country do not have retirement savings to start with, and 1/3 say they are not on track for retirement. Even before this crisis, women were more likely than men to face poverty in retirement, in part due to the wages they lose over the course of their careers to pay discrimination, lack of quality affordable child care, and national paid family leave. Injustices like investments compound over time, leaving the average woman with over $400,000 less in earnings than her male colleagues over a 40-year career. That gap is even larger for women of color, who are estimated to lose around $1 million over the course of their career due to the wage gap. And now, after this pandemic, 1/5 of Americans, 1/4 of women, and over 1/4 of people of color say they are worse off financially. Over half of Americans say they are more worried about retirement than they were a year ago, and nearly half do not think they will ever be able to retire. We were facing a retirement crisis before COVID-19, but as with so many other things, this pandemic has just poured gasoline on the fire. If we are going to rebuild our country stronger and fairer, we have to address the reality that for far too long, the ways we help families plan for the future have been stuck in the past, stuck in a time when women were not half of the workforce, when student debt wasn't at an historic high, when health care was less expensive, when more employers offered strong retirement benefits like pensions, and when it was unthinkable that cyber attacks could throw the life savings of millions of people into jeopardy with just a few keystrokes. We need to take steps today to protect families' plans for tomorrow. We need to make it easier for people to save for an emergency, enroll in a quality retirement plan, and get the tools and knowledge they need to plan their financial futures. We need to address long-standing threats to families' finances like the racism, sexism, and ableism that have chipped away at the economic security of so many people for decades, and new threats like cyber attacks, which our retirement system has yet to fully reckon with. A lot has changed for families across the country over the last year, to say nothing of the last 8 years since our last retirement hearing. So I'm incredibly glad we are able to have this hearing today, and I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation we're having today and working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to address pressing challenges and make long-needed updates to our nation's retirement security. And with that, I will turn it over to Ranking Senator Burr for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, for scheduling this hearing and highlight the needs for Americans to save more for their future. I hope this bipartisan hearing is a sign that the committee will work collaboratively on retirement legislation in our jurisdiction instead of using reconciliation again to move partisan ideas or more expensive bailouts. I want to welcome our witnesses. I want to thank you for being here and for your expertise. I want to especially welcome Dave Gray. North Carolina, Madam Chairman, is the home of a lot of Fidelity employees. So we look to Fidelity for more than just the advice they give us today. They're the backbone of employment. Some members of the HELP Committee, like myself, serve on other committees like Finance and Aging, who have held recent hearings on retirement matters. The hook into retirement issues for our Labor Committee is ERISA, and the Employee Retirement and Income Security Act, ERISA, sets standards for retirement and health plans in private industry to protect individuals in these plans. The Tax Committee in Congress handles the Internal Revenue Code portion. There's an overlap between committees that typically gets worked out very smoothly. That said, as a member of the HELP, Finance, and Aging, I consider my office a one-stop shop on retirement and aging matters. I'll personally get engaged in any bipartisan retirement matter without worry of jurisdiction, but for today, we'll concentrate on the HELP piece. Our particular focus today is to find contribution plans, the reliable superstar of the retirement world. The question before us is, what's working well and what's lagging and needs improvements? The answer to that question is easy at the surface level. The system works great. The system doesn't work great when you don't or can't participate. What we need to do is help Americans and their employers offer, operate, and fund individual retirement plans. We also need to make sure that people who have screwed up nearly every other retirement plan in America don't get their hands on the freedom and flexibility Americans have in their private retirement accounts. Many Americans who look ahead at their retirement have to look at the newspaper to see what's happening with Social Security, with their company or union defined benefit plan, or their catastrophically underfunded state and local pension plans. Not so with defined contribution. Americans in defined contributions plans pick up a piece of paper and see two things: their name and their account balance. It's their money, and it's there. It's not a promise. It's not an accounting notation. It doesn't require a bailout. It's their money. It requires time, it requires personal contributions, maybe an employer match, and some basic financial knowledge. While investments must be managed well, market fluctuations must be weathered, and smart decisions made as you near retirement, no politician can steal your 401k or IRA, at least not yet. Congress is good at two things: overreacting and underreacting. Individual retirement plans haven't gotten a lot of attention in some respects because they work. Individual retirement plans show that regular folks benefit from the success of corporate America and, quite frankly, investments. Despite the anti-business rhetoric we hear from some in Congress and the administration, it would surprise many that the energy or pharmaceutical companies that the Biden administration intends to put out of business are mainly owned by retirement plans. And that, in fact, is Americans. That's you and me and anyone else with a retirement account. This irks some. It doesn't jive with their government-centric philosophy. It doesn't jive with their desire to demonize business when business is owned by Americans' retirement plans. Retirement works when Americans control their own money. It goes wrong when we add middlemen with goals other than putting real money into a nest egg and growing that. What happens when people other than you control your retirement? In the American Rescue Plan Act, passed by Congress and signed into law in March, They included a massive bailout for certain multi-employer pension plans. These are retirement plans negotiated and promised by private sector employers and unions to private sector workers. Employers and unions couldn't afford the promises they made to workers over the past several decades, so they gave them $80 billion. That is, they gave them $80 billion of taxpayer funds to make private agreements work. A bailout, pure and simple, with no reforms to these plans to make sure that the promises will be able to be honored in the future. The federal government can't afford to guarantee every retirement promise made between private companies and their workers or between poorly run states and their public unions. We have a national debt of $28 trillion, and that's just today. There are numerous mismanaged pension systems that have failures looming both in the private and public sectors as we sit here. The latest data in 2018 from the Federal Reserve estimates $4.5 trillion in public plan underfunding. $4.5 trillion in underfunding. Employees, states, and retirees should not and cannot rely on government bailouts for the future. So that means Congress needs to work together to shore up retirement options and to help Americans save for their own retirement. Americans need to start saving more. With fewer Americans having access to an employer-sponsored pension plan, old rules of thumb about how much to save are outdated. The gap between the retirement savings Americans have and the savings they need is already in the trillions and likely to grow. Not only are many Americans struggling to keep pace with their savings needs, even more alarming is how many people have no savings outside of Social Security. The data we've seen says that over 1/4 of non-retirees have nothing in their retirement piggy banks, many of whom are already nearing the traditional retirement age. And while the long-term impact of the pandemic and economic lockdowns remains to be seen, we know that many Americans needed to tap into their retirement savings to pay more immediate needs in the past year, draining assets that were intended for retirement. On the bright side of these discouraging numbers is what we know that works. AARP says that workers are 15 times more likely to save for retirement if they have access to a payroll deduction plan at work. You don't spend what you don't see. We've also seen the success of a defined contribution plan features like automatic enrollment and employer matching, which show that most workers will not opt out of an employer-sponsored savings plan if they're already enrolled, and many will set their payroll deduction to maximize the level they earn on the employer match. So the questions of how to improve the average American's retirement outlook is not how do we bail out the systems that make up multi-trillion-dollar savings gaps. Instead, it's how do we help employees and employers take advantage of the savings programs that already work. I look forward to the hearing today. I look forward to the expertise of our panelists, and I thank the chair for her indulgence.
Thank you, Senator Burr. I will now introduce today's witnesses. Laurie Lucas is the president and CEO of the Employee Benefit Research Institute in Washington, D.C. Thank you and welcome and thank you for joining us today. Next, I'd like to introduce Shia Kabas, the Director of Economic Policy at the Bipartisan Policy Center in Washington, D.C. Thank you for joining us today. Next, Dava Kyle serves as counsel to Bredhoff and Kaiser PLLC and advises clients on a wide range of issues under retirement and Internal Revenue Code laws and regulations. We're glad to have you here today. And finally, I would like to introduce Dave Gray. Mr. Gray is the head of workplace retirement offerings and platforms at Fidelity Investments in Washington, D.C. Thank you for being here today. Ms. Lucas, we will begin with your opening statement.
Good morning, and thank you to Chairwoman Murray, Ranking Member Burr, and members of the committee for inviting me to testify on the important topic of retirement security. The events of the past 14 months, including pandemic-related job loss, increased caregiving needs, and heightened stress have, among other things, highlighted the need for savings and financial security. My name is Laurie Lucas, and I am the CEO of the Employee Benefit Research Institute. EBRI is a nonpartisan, tax-exempt organization that contributes to sound employee benefit programs and public policy through independent, objective, fact-based research. I want to start by thanking the Senate Help Committee for the good work they've done in improving the U.S. retirement system over the years. To put things in context, I believe that the best way to think of the U.S. retirement system is pre- and post-2006 Pension Protection Act. Prior to the PPA, defined contribution plans largely relied on individual workers to be engaged and to navigate savings and investing on their own. It was essentially a do-it-yourself system. However, the average worker is not a professional investor. They need help. The PPA recognized this and incentivized employers to automate their defined contribution plan so that the default is for workers to be enrolled in the plan, to save at higher levels over time, and to invest in a diversified portfolio. Yet, there are areas that the PPA did not fully address, creating the opportunity today to further improve the system. These include greater access, reduced plan leakage, and supporting thoughtful post-retirement spending. When it comes to improving access, EBRI research shows that the probability of successful retirement depends to a great extent on whether employees are eligible to participate in a defined contribution plan. Using EBRI's retirement security projection model, we find that merely having access to an employer-sponsored DC plan increases the chances that workers will have enough money to sustain themselves in retirement by 50%. Yet, we find that about 4 in 10 workers are projected to fall short of what they need in retirement savings, resulting in an aggregate retirement deficit across all U.S. households of $3.68 trillion in today's dollars. This deficit is owed in part to the fact that many American workers, mainly those who work for small employers, do not have access to employer-sponsored retirement plans. Indeed, while 90% of workers at large companies have access, only half of workers at smaller companies do. Simply put, smaller companies often cannot afford to offer the existing traditional retirement plans. The recently passed Secure Act recognized this and created an alternative, pooled employer plans. PEPs allow multiple employers to offer a single plan that is run by an outside administrator who also serves as the plan's fiduciary. The key to PEPs fulfilling their potential for expanding access, however, is to streamline legal and compliance needs, namely non-essential reporting, auditing, and compliance requirements that can increase costs and thereby reduce employer adoption rates. Turning to plan leakage, the main culprit here is cash outs by employees when they leave their employer. Each year, approximately 40% of terminated participants elect to prematurely cash out of their defined contribution plan, and these are mainly younger workers with small balances. Part of the reason is that cash outs are easy. In contrast, under the current rules, rolling over money into your new employer's plan can be extremely challenging. How can not cashing out be made easy? One way is through auto portability. That's where a participant's account from a former employer's retirement plan is automatically combined with their active account in the new employer's plan. This helps keep the assets in the retirement system and reduces leakage from cash outs. EBRI research finds that if we were to completely eliminate cash outs, the youngest workers in the lowest income quartile would have a 35.5% increase in balances at retirement. Policies that support reducing or eliminating cash outs from workplace retirement plans can improve outcomes, especially for lower wage workers. I want to conclude with a discussion of financial security in retirement. EBRI Spending and Retirement Survey identifies 2 types of retirees who stand in stark contrast to one another. First are highly indebted retirees who are a significant and growing group. They are characterized as predominantly female, divorced, people of color with relatively low financial assets and crushing or unmanageable debt. Their retirement lifestyle is fraught with challenges, uncertainty, frustration, and the sense that they are barely hanging on. Policies that promote financial wellness initiatives such as budgeting, debt management, and financial coaching through the workplace during the accumulation phase can benefit workers in real time and also provide skills that can be carried over to retirement to potentially address the growing issue of debt in older ages. On the other end of the spectrum, you have long-term secure retirees who have many sources of income, and they're often guaranteed, such as defined benefit plans or retiree medical coverage. These retiree lives are comfortable, stable, and secure. But unfortunately, this long-term secure cohort is likely to shrink as defined benefit plans and retiree medical plans become less prevalent. A possible solution would involve policies that promote sources of guaranteed income within the workplace other than defined benefit benefit plans such as immediate or deferred income annuities. In conclusion, the U.S. retirement system has made a lot of progress in the past 15 years. However, there is more to do. Taking lessons from the PPA, solutions that employ automation, that leverage the current system without undermining it, and that understand the needs of American workers to improve access, stem leakage, and create better retirement spenders. Thank you for all you have done to improve the retirement system over the years. With your support and perseverance, we can build an even better future for Americans' retirement security.
Thank you. Mr. Covet.
Good morning, Chair Murray, Ranking Member Burr, and distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me to testify today about the state of retirement security in America and where we go from here. My name is Shai Akabis, and I'm Director of Economic Policy at the Bipartisan Policy Center, a nonprofit organization that combines the best ideas from both parties to promote health, security, and opportunity for all Americans. The U.S. retirement system is working well for many people, particularly those with stable employment, sufficient income, and opportunities to save throughout their life. While the structures in place have room for improvement, they result in positive, financially stable outcomes for a majority of households. But millions of Americans are falling through the proverbial cracks in the system, and cracks is really an understatement. These are gaping holes in need of reform. My testimony will discuss where these holes are and how this committee can start to repair them. I'll start by briefly discussing the challenge. A majority of Americans worry about running out of money in retirement, making it the nation's top financial concern. Recent trends, from the COVID pandemic and recession to rising healthcare costs to increasing life expectancies, have made building a secure retirement both more important and more challenging. Although the retirement security challenge is faced by all Americans, the ability to meet it varies significantly. Workers with low incomes, those without college degrees, people of color, women, and part-time seasonal and temporary workers all disproportionately struggle to save for retirement. Even when these workers can and want to save, they frequently do not have access to a workplace retirement plan. I hope this committee will appreciate how the current retirement system often works well for people like us in this room and focus on how to make it work just as well for those it currently leaves behind. In 2016, BPC convened a bipartisan commission on retirement security and personal savings, co-chaired by former Senator Kent Conrad and Jim Lockhart, a senior Bush administration official. The commission spent 2 years studying the status of retirement security in the U.S. and made recommendations in 6 key areas. They were 1, improving access to and the design of workplace retirement savings plans; 2, promoting personal savings for short-term needs and preserving retirement savings for older age; 3, facilitating lifetime income options to reduce the risk of outliving savings; 4, facilitating the use of home equity for retirement consumption; 5, improving financial capability among all Americans; and 6, strengthening Social Security's finances and modernizing the program. I know it's outside this committee's jurisdiction, but looming over the retirement landscape is the impending depletion of the Social Security Retirement Trust Fund. While policymakers can debate the best way to restore the program to financial sustainability, I want to emphasize that the longer Congress waits to make changes, the less palatable and the more drastic they will be. And the delay is incredibly unfair to Americans trying to plan for retirement. Social Security's financial challenges are solvable, but they'll be easiest to address if we start now. There is no silver bullet to America's retirement security challenge, and different solutions will help different groups of savers. We need an all-of-the-above approach to maximize the reach and effectiveness of our current retirement system. I'm going to briefly propose 3 good bipartisan places to start. 1, in the private sector, only 2/3 of workers have access to a workplace retirement plan, and only half actually participate. Employees of small and medium-sized businesses are especially unlikely to have access to an employer-sponsored plan. When you ask these businesses why they don't offer plans, the number one reason cited is often cost or administrative burden. The emerging PEPs, authorized by the Secure Act, could help in this regard. But there's another part of the equation. Most employers wishing to offer a retirement plan today also must accept the fiduciary responsibility that goes along with it. For businesses with small or non-existent HR departments, this task is daunting or simply impossible without paying for external support. To help these businesses offer plans while ensuring that their employees are protected, Congress should further relax fiduciary obligations for small businesses while making sure to transfer that responsibility to other private sector entities and regulators who are better equipped to handle them. Meanwhile, several states have enacted laws requiring all employers over a certain size to automatically enroll their workers in some form of retirement savings plan. More states are following suit, but workers in states without these requirements are getting left behind, while the emerging patchwork of different requirements in different states is a headache for businesses that operate across state lines. Congress can extend coverage to Americans everywhere and streamline regulations by creating a national minimum coverage standard that preempts the multitude of mandates at the state level. One study found that this approach could increase average retirement savings for middle-income earners by roughly 50%. Number two, without emergency savings, a sudden loss of income or a surprise expense can upend a worker's financial life. It can also lead them to raid retirement savings. Unfortunately, an alarming share of Americans have very little emergency savings or even none whatsoever. A promising way to help workers build emergency savings is to take a tool from the retirement world and apply it to retirement savings for emergencies. Apply it to building savings for emergencies. Automatic enrollment has proven to be an extremely powerful way to increase participation and boost retirement savings. Employers that want to should be able to similarly default their workers into an emergency savings plan that deposits a portion of each paycheck into an emergency savings account. Unfortunately, the law is unclear for employers that want to adopt automatic enrollment for these accounts. Providing regulatory clarity along with reasonable consumer protections will open the door to this promising tool and with it, better savings outcomes. Number three, several pieces of pending bipartisan legislation would build on the success of automatic features, incorporating them into more retirement plans. I've touched on that in my written testimony and would be glad to discuss it further in the Q&A. Finally, retirement security has been a standout area for bipartisan cooperation in Congress, in no small part thanks to the leadership of many members of this committee. We at BPC have seen the power that a broad coalition can bring to an issue like retirement security. We launched the Funding Our Future initiative in 2018, and our coalition now unites more than 50 organizations from the academic, nonprofit, trade association, and corporate sectors. I can attest that its strength comes from its bipartisan makeup. Funding Our Future's three goals are to make saving easier for Americans at all ages, to help them transform nest eggs into retirement income, and to ensure that Social Security is financially stable both for current and future retirees. We at BPC and Funding Our Future are eager to continue working toward those goals with all of you. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. We will turn to Ms. Kyle.
Chairperson Murray, Ranking Member Burr, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today about disparities in retirement savings. My name is Dava Kyle, and I am of counsel with the law firm of Bredoff & Kaiser. Since joining the firm in 2019, I've represented pension plans and labor organizations in the public and private sector in a range of industries, including food service, education, manufacturing, cleaning services, and construction. I work principally as benefits counsel, providing advice on federal and state compliance as it relates to 401k and other defined contribution, defined benefit, and health and welfare plans. Before joining Bredoff & Kaiser, I spent 15 years in government. I worked at the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation on detail with the Treasury Department and the House of Representatives Ways and Means Committee, where I advised on a range of tax and retirement issues. I have dedicated the better part of the last 2 decades to supporting the retirement systems so many rely on in this country. In my testimony today, I will be discussing retirement savings with a focus on class disparities, racial disparities, and gender disparities. While the numbers are different in each of these groups, the story is the same. Retirement policy that relies on the ability of individuals to save will only exacerbate the income inequality already present in this country. In 2019, high-income families were 14 times more likely to have retirement savings accounts than low-income families. Those with incomes in the bottom 20% of earners have zero savings, and those in the second bottom 20% of earners have only $860 in savings. When you look at the median working family that actually does have retirement savings, they have on average only $11,700 saved in their retirement accounts. Part-time workers, whose jobs are the most insecure, not only do not save for retirement, but do not see retirement as an option. Over half of part-time workers in a recent survey said they will keep working past normal retirement age, and over 1 in 5 said that they will never retire. When we look at retirement disparities along race and ethnic lines, the picture is even worse. By and large, white people have substantially more retirement savings and retirement plan participation than people of color. In 2016, the average white family had almost $160,000 in liquid retirement savings, compared to only about $25,000 for Black families and $29,000 for Hispanic families. Most Black and Hispanic households have no retirement savings at all. Many of the disparities we see by gender come from the fact that women are disproportionately low-wage workers and work in industries that don't provide access to employer-sponsored retirement plans. Disparities in retirement savings between men and women also are a result of the persistent gender wage gap. Because labor unions fight and achieve improved wages and benefits for working people, it is not surprising that union membership substantially improves access to the participation in retirement benefits that are provided through employment, especially for blue-collar jobs. The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics reported that in 2019, over 90% of union workers had access to private retirement benefits, compared to less than 2/3 of non-union workers. Women and people of color have faced increased difficulties in saving for retirement as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And many no longer have jobs to provide income that allow them to save for retirement. In total, over 2.3 million women left the labor workforce from February 2020 to February 2021, a disproportionate number as compared to their percentage in the overall workforce. When women and people of color cannot pay for their day-to-day needs, they cannot save for retirement. As these disparities make clear, retirement insecurity is highly correlated to whether workers have the disposable income to afford to save for retirement. But this doesn't have to be the case. Policies that improve worker wages, expand access, and require employer contributions, not just matching contributions, to defined contribution plans, and provide workers with funds to cover emergencies so that they can save for retirement, all will bolster retirement savings for working people. Proposals that are targeted to retirement disparities will also help. The Women's Retirement Protection Act, for example, extends spousal consent requirements into defined contribution plans so women don't unknowingly lose their retirement at divorce, and allows more long-term part-time workers who are disproportionately women to participate in company plans. I testify today about the disparities in retirement, but I'm not a sociologist and I'm not an economist. I'm an attorney who sees these disparities in my work with working people every day. I see it when plans review the impact of robust stock markets on plan investments and then turn to consider appeals from members with limited means who have been denied benefits. I see it when corporations decide to work from home and their janitors lose their jobs and their retirement savings all at once. I ask, as you consider retirement policy, that you remember these workers and three things. Defined contribution plans are an important source of retirement income for many Americans, but right now they are insufficient to provide lifetime income for most. Unions help the most vulnerable workers advocate for better, more secure retirement, and public policy should reflect that. Lastly, adequately funding Social Security will have the biggest impact on retirement security for most workers in this country because these workers simply do not make enough money in their working years to cover decades of retirement. I'd like to thank the committee for their time and attention today and for their commitment to closing disparities in retirement savings in this country.
Thank you. Mr. Gray.
Chair Murray, Ranking Member Burr, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I'm even more honored given Fidelity's significant presence in many of the states represented by the committee. My name is Dave Gray, and I am the head of Workplace Retirement Product at Fidelity Investments. Fidelity is the nation's largest provider of workplace savings plans and individual retirement accounts. In our workplace investing business, we have the privilege of serving more than 22,000 employers with over 33 million workplace participant accounts. Today, I'd like to share what is working in the retirement system, but mostly focus my time on steps that Congress can take to enhance it. We believe that workplace retirement plans have proven to be an indispensable foundation to the retirement system, assisting tens of millions of families. And the system is working well for those that can access and those that can optimize its features, like employer match and auto-escalating contributions. However, nearly 50% of private sector workers have lacked access to a workplace plan. So we applaud Congress for creating the Pooled Employer Plan, or PEPs, as part of the Secure Act of 2019. PEPs are an excellent step forward toward addressing the retirement coverage gap by making it easier for small businesses to access a plan. In response, Fidelity has created a PEP called the Fidelity Advantage 401k, and our initial offer is deliberately focused on the needs of small businesses who do not yet offer a retirement plan. We are very proud to have enrolled a small grocery store, a women-owned publisher of children's books, and a security services firm founded by 2 disabled veterans, just to name a few. Fidelity, along with the other 60 or so entities that are registered with the Department of Labor to serve as a pool plan provider, could go a long way together to help address the coverage gap. Now, there are many areas in which, working together, we believe we can enhance and strengthen the retirement security system. Over the past year, the COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted the challenges many American workers and their families face every day to cover immediate costs while still trying to save for the future. Last year alone, 1.6 million Fidelity customers took distributions from their retirement accounts under the CARES Act due to the financial impact of the pandemic. The substantial number of withdrawals demonstrates the need for emergency savings. Employers can play a key role in helping workers accumulate short-term savings. And I will tell you, this is top of mind to many of the employers that we serve. Congress can support the adoption of emergency savings programs by enacting legislative change, such as allowing participants to earn a match to the retirement plan by means of contributing to an emergency savings account. Additionally, employees are increasingly turning to their employers for help with tackling student debt. 79% of those with student debt tell us that it impacts their ability to save for retirement. Now, we applaud the extension of the CARES Act provision that allows employers to contribute up to $5,250 annually toward an employee's student loans, tax-free, through 2025. However, we believe Congress can do more by passing legislation that would permit an employer to make matching contributions in the workplace retirement plan with respect to student loan payments. Our research shows that this legislation could have the effect of doubling retirement security for those that are struggling with student debt. And we are seeing significant pent-up demand from employers that are interested in offering such a solution. And lastly, saving for retirement plans means factoring in healthcare costs. Fidelity estimates that a couple age 65 retiring today will need about $300,000 to cover medical expenses throughout retirement, not including long-term costs. The long-term value of a health savings account can position a family for greater financial security, and we support legislation that would expand access to these savings vehicles and allow for additional contributions. As a leading HSA provider, our data shows that the benefits of an HSA also extend to low-income levels in workers, as they tend to accumulate a balance in their HSA accounts as years go by. And the vast majority of Fidelity's clients precede the HSA account with a specific amount, meaning that HSA holders who may not be able to contribute much will still benefit from the employer contribution. In conclusion, Fidelity supports a number of bills that are being considered by the Senate and the House that address many of these issues. On behalf of Fidelity and the millions of Americans we serve, we appreciate the invitation to share our views, and we look forward to continuing to work with the committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all of our witnesses this morning. We will now begin a round of 5-minute questions of our witnesses, and I again ask my colleagues to keep track of the clock and stay within those 5 minutes. Data released earlier this year by the Bureau of Labor Statistics found that only 39% of part-time private sector workers have access to retirement benefits, and according to the BLS, nearly 2/3 of part-time workers are women. We took a big first step in the SECURE Act by increasing access to retirement plans for long-term part-time workers, but I think we can do a lot better. That's why I am pushing for legislation like the Women's Retirement Protection Act, which would further expand access to retirement plans for part-time workers and address other challenges that undermine women's financial security. I want to hear from each of you this morning. How can we improve access to retirement benefits for part-time workers, many of whom are women, and encourage participation when those benefits are offered? Ms. Lucas, let's start with you.
Thank you, Senator Murray. We looked at the recently passed legislation for requiring coverage of part-time employees at the Employee Benefit Research Institute. And while we found that it was beneficial in increasing the amount of people that will have enough savings for retirement, When we looked at it in combination with other initiatives, we saw a much more robust picture. We looked at it when we looked at people that were in open MEPs, were automatically enrolled, and they had required coverage of part-time employees with auto portability. So looking at this more holistic picture of not only getting people into the plans, including part-time employees, but keeping that money in the system, we saw a much greater increase in the amount of people that would have retirement security. In fact, we found that for people aged 35 to 39 who work for small employers, their reduction in savings shortfall was 26% if you combine these features. So we believe that it is not just getting people into the plans that is at issue here, but more holistically keeping that money in the system, because part-time employees are likely to have low balances, and those are the balances that are likely to be cashed out even once they're in the system when they change jobs.
Mr. Cabas?
Senator, we've talked about the coverage gap a lot today, and I think the most effective and perhaps the only solution that can really get most of these part-time workers covered is a national standard. And I think that has two steps. The first is that private businesses are unlikely to voluntarily cover these workers because of the administrative costs of maintaining many small accounts, including for former employees. But on the other hand, simply mandating all of them would put undue burden on many of these small businesses and lack consumer protections. So I think that there's two steps here. The first is to make it as seamless and costless as possible for small businesses to offer these plans. Steps were taken to do that in the Secure Act. There are additional provisions that could make that even stronger and remove further responsibility from them, including on the fiduciary side, and transfer that to other entities. And then the second is that once that's done, and we have options like PEPs and state plans out there, we can have a national standard that requires all employers above a certain size to enroll their workers. And when we have that in place, it could preempt all of the different requirements that are occurring at the state level and just have one consistent national standard.
Okay, Ms. Kyle?
I agree with the other witnesses here. I also think it's important to recognize that Social Security is the best and most equal retirement system our country has. Improving Social Security will go a long way to improving retirement security for women and part-time workers. Second, I think solutions that focus on providing money to individuals to save for retirement security in portable plans are much more important than solutions that provide other kinds of incentives like tax deductions, which mostly benefit, as we know, the wealthiest people in more secure employment. I would encourage Congress to enact legislation that mandates employer contributions to retirement savings plans and that provide employees with funds so that they can save more.
Thank you. Mr. Gray?
Chair, thank you for the question. We are very supportive of accelerating the participation requirements like we've seen in Secure Act and Secure Act 2.0 that would ensure that workers that are part-time workers get covered by workplace retirement plans. We think that's foundational to creating retirement security. I would also emphasize PEPs, pooled employer plans. I think this is, we're very early in this. This is new. But from what we're seeing tremendous interest, and I think one of the keys to addressing the question you raised is to ensure that when those individuals go to work, their employer can offer them a plan. And what we see in PEPs is the ability for small business owners to have the economies of scale that large plans have, and to offload the administrative work to reduce the barrier to offering a plan, allow them to focus on their business, and allow us to focus on delivering a retirement solution to their employees. Beyond that, I certainly would agree as well that it certainly goes beyond the workplace retirement plans. We should look at things such as emergency savings and the like, which I know we'll probably discuss in a few other questions.
Thank you. Senator Burr?
Thank you, Chairman. I want to thank all four of you because all four of you have actually presented solutions to real problems. And I won't speak for the chairman, but sometimes we get testimony and we're sitting there searching for the value out of it other than an opportunity to spend 5 minutes in front of a congressional committee. And I think all four of you have done a wonderful job at pointing us in directions. Mr. Gray, Fidelity has a product that allows small business to take advantage of the economies of scale and pool together. You alluded to it and you talked about the interest. Can you gauge that interest? Can you convey to us how much interest is out there?
Yeah, I would say that we are seeing extremely strong or significantly strong organic demand without really any marketing or promotion on our part. Just small businesses reaching out to us, calling us, asking for a solution. I will tell you that in the past, many of these small businesses were businesses that we really could not serve in a cost-effective way for them and their employees. Instead, now with the PEP, we're able to provide that solution for them. We expect this to grow very significantly, and we are very committed to making the solution work to get after the coverage gap.
Are there other barriers or red tape that government should look at reducing or streamlining to encourage more employers to adopt a retirement plan for their employees?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of potential solutions to that. I think one, which we've seen in some of the pending legislation, which is an extension of tax credits to small employers to incent them to establish the plan. And I think as well, making clear the fiduciary responsibilities, as other testimony has provided. In the solution that Fidelity is providing, we are taking fiduciary responsibility for that retirement plan, trying to make it as easy as possible for the employer. So they simply need to make the selection, fund the payroll, and we'll take the fiduciary responsibility from there. And I think that's really the gold standard approach for a pooled employer plan.
Ms. Lucas, you talked about in your testimony financial literacy, and financial literacy is something that, while we aim to advance it and to bring increased access to retirement advice for all Americans, we understand the average American will not attain the level of knowledge and proficiency a retirement expert would have. And I remember in my early days in the House 27 years ago, I used to put out a book. It was called Life 101, and it was given to every high school graduate, because many of those high school graduates didn't go to college where they got sort of that advanced level. And it had things in it like how to set up a bank account and some information on life insurance. And I was told by the Ethics Committee in the House that that had to be excluded from the book because that wasn't the responsibility of a member of Congress to share with constituents. So I approached this question with you from that aspect, that government's not necessarily the right one to make the decisions, but what can we do to enhance the financial literacy and the retirement advice that these folks are getting over and above what's available today?
Well, in our retirement confidence survey, we find that people are, there's a bit of a disconnect even in terms of the amount of financial skill people think that they have. The majority of people in the retirement confidence survey are actually pretty confident about retirement. And then we look at numbers like we've talked about today, which shows that that may be overconfidence. On the other hand, I remember distinctly early in my career when and this was decades ago, when I was talking to a plan sponsor who said, we spend millions and millions of dollars educating the same 20% of people. The other 80% they're not listening to us. And that's why I think things like auto features are so important, not only within the retirement system, and we've demonstrated that they work, but to Mr. Gray's point, other aspects as well. Not only perhaps emergency savings, but student loan debt. Using what we know works, which is the defined contribution system, to help people almost in spite of themselves, to harness the things that we know are dominating their behavior, such as inertia, and allowing them to get into an emergency savings vehicle, a student loan debt repayment vehicle, or a 401k, depending on their circumstances, automatically. Not asking them to become financially literate when they've got a day job and other things that they need to be focusing on other than becoming a financial professional.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Casey.
Chair Murray, thank you for this hearing. I'm going to thank you and the ranking member for making it possible for us to focus on such a critically important issue to the American people. And I'll start with Ms. Kyle. I know that she's done a lot of work, not only in this area generally, but in particular, her work in the House. And I'm grateful for the public service she did there. And I think I'm stating something that's maybe self-evident, but probably not said enough, that one of the most important elements of any kind of economic security for the middle class is retirement security, but we don't spend enough time on this issue. So many Americans will ask, do I have enough money to save for retirement? Can I retire comfortably? All those questions are on the minds of workers, and for too many of them, the answer to those questions is no. We were told that in 2018, just a little more than half, 52% of private sector workers participated in a retirement plan. Ms. Kyle, you noted in your testimony when it comes to Black Americans and Latino Americans, it's 54 and 61 are at risk of not having enough money in retirement. So one of my priorities, and I know it's a huge priority for so many of us, is making it easier for working and middle-class families to have a secure retirement. By definition, that requires that we work with folks on both sides of the aisle to ensure that Americans can earn a living wage and that they have something left over to put away for retirement. I especially appreciate, Ms. Kyle, the fact that you made the connection about today and tomorrow, meaning the connection between wages and retirement, which is apparent and evident, but it also is not an issue, not a connection we make, that people's wages and their income today will determine what they have tomorrow. So I guess I'd ask you, can you discuss some of the best tools available today to give working families an opportunity to save? So that'll be question one, the tools available. Question two would be, if you could shed some light on the gaps that exist with respect to access to those tools, and then thirdly, how they can be addressed. And I know you've provided some of this in your testimony, but I think repetition is helpful.
Absolutely. And you're exactly right. You know, the retirement crisis in this country is the flip side of the wage crisis, right? I think that when we think about providing more retirement security to workers, it is essential to ensure fair pay so that people can actually afford to save. You know, there are a few things that can be done, though, beyond looking solely at ensuring fair pay. You can ensure that all employers, large and small, either provide retirement plans directly or participate in pooled plans with required employer contributions so that it doesn't rely solely on the wages of an individual worker, and with automatic enrollment and portability so that plans can follow people as they switch jobs. Because as we know, we're no longer in the 1950s or 60s where people get a job, when they're 20 years old and then retire there. People switch jobs, and a lot of times, if their plans don't go with them, they're a step back in providing retirement security. Congress can also provide starter tax credits that'll go a long way into providing retirement security by going directly into savers' retirement accounts. Both emergency savings accounts and retirement accounts with direct tax credits would help people who can't afford to put away money from their wages. I think the best thing that Congress can do is also to limit efforts that stymie union participation. The evidence is really clear that for working people, benefits provided through unions are the primary way that they can save for their future.
Well, it's very helpful, and I know we're almost out of time. I'll yield back my time, maybe have some questions for the record for other members of the panel, but Chair Murray, thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll go to Senator Moran.
Chairman, thank you very much. Let me ask a couple of questions. Maybe the first one for Mr. Gray. Mr. Gray, you're a plan provider. You're aware of the types of temporary relief that regulators took to alleviate burdens during the pandemic, prompted by the shutdown and lockdowns and social distancing. I know the IRS granted temporary relief to the notarization requirements for a spousal consent, for example. Do you think that making these kinds of things permanent, some or all of those temporary things that were provided or other temporary relief that I may not know about, would that be helpful continuing into the future? Are there ways that doing so would reduce the material costs associated with small businesses offering these kind of plans, retirement plans?
Senator, thank you for the question, and I'll start specifically with your question around e-notarization and the temporary relief. Yes, we, Fidelity, and our clients would certainly like to see that relief become permanent. We think it has been a very effective way for notarization process to happen in distributions that is both respective of individuals' concerns with the pandemic and the health crisis, as well as in many ways far more secure. That e-notarization is videotaped, and in addition, there are challenge questions presented in order to validate or verify the identity of the individuals for e-notarization. And knowing that we're living in a digital age, we think it makes sense that the relief should continue for e-notarization for purposes of retirement plan withdrawals. In addition to that, I think great strides have been made by this body and by regulators with regards to electronic delivery of plan notices. We'd also want to make sure that that continues and is expanded as necessary. We find e-delivery notices to reduce cost burden and also help individuals that may have disabilities that need accessibility. And we think it actually better engages with individuals in interacting with the retirement plan. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Gray. Let me ask any of the witnesses. One of the things that with the pandemic that is highlighted is the lack of savings for an emergency. Something happens in one's life or their family's life, and sometimes perhaps retirement accounts become a place that can provide some safety, a safety net. But the consequence of that is diminishing the value of the retirement account upon retirement. And so let me ask if there are things that employers could or should be doing to help individuals save, not just for retirement, but for emergencies that may arise from today until their date of retirement, in order to better preserve the retirement accounts for purposes of retirement. Anybody have suggestions for me of things that me and my colleagues might pursue?
I can start with that question. We did see that with the CARES Act, the defined contribution system, which again is one place where people do tend to have money, was used as a de facto emergency savings vehicle because that was where the money was. Fortunately, not a lot of people did end up taking coronavirus-related distributions, but those that did, they were in industries where they, really were in dire need, and they did need emergency savings. So thank goodness, at least they had the 401k plan for that. But we need to think about how can we leverage the existing system to help with emergency savings, because it is such a robust system. And having something like a sidecar savings account attached to the existing defined contribution system is something that employers have expressed a lot of interest in. According to our financial well-being survey of employers, 26% said that they would like to offer a sidecar savings account in the next 1 to 2 years. And any policies that could help to facilitate that, and including, allowing employers to match to those accounts, I think would be very welcome, especially since if they're a sidecar savings account, people are then not taking money from the corpus of their retirement plan. It's a separate account that's attached to the 401k plan, but it's specifically for emergencies. And that is important from a mental accounting perspective. Behavioral finance shows that when people think, when they see a big pile of money and they identify that as an emergency source of emergency savings, they'll likely take more money than they need. But if they are limited to a pool that's actually designated for emergencies as an emergency savings account, they're likely to take constrain the amount of money they take during emergencies, and that would be the value of the sidecar savings.
That makes sense to me, Ms. Lucas. Thank you.
And Senator, if I could just quickly add to what Ms. Lucas was saying, I think another barrier that a lot of employers are facing to offering these types of plans is the lack of ability to automatically enroll workers today. And there's legislation from the last Congress that would clear out regulatory barriers that currently make it unclear for employers that want to use this. And that can make a huge difference because today we're seeing enrollment in these plans that are offered at fairly low levels. And that's what we saw in retirement accounts before automatic enrollment became the norm. So if we can have legislation that would clear those barriers, there's legislation being rewritten right now that was introduced in the last Congress by several bipartisan senators that could have that effect, and I think it could open the doors for employers that want to experiment with these types of accounts, whether it's a sidecar account that is actually attached to the retirement account or a standalone emergency savings account that you could automatically enroll workers into.
Thank you very much. Thanks for highlighting that.
Thank you. Senator Kane.
Thank you, Chair Murray and Ranking Member Burr, and to our witnesses, very powerful testimony. I want to begin with just re-emphasizing Ms. Kyle's testimony about racial disparities that are on page 4 and 5 of her written testimony. Just top line, the percentage of Hispanic families with retirement savings in 2019 was 32%, Black families 44%, white families 65%. And then if you look at the amount of savings, it's even starker. Average white family in 2016 had about $160,000 in liquid retirement savings. Black families, $25,000 in liquid retirement savings, and Hispanic families, $29,000. Ms. Kyle's testimony points out that a good bit of this is because of wage gaps, but you also really have to grapple with the effect of wealth gaps. We commemorated 400 years of African presence in Virginia in 2019. And as we were doing that commemoration, it sort of made me look at history this way. Divide the 400 years since Africans came to the English colonies into 8 half centuries. For 5 of the 8 half centuries, Africans were held as property. They couldn't own and accumulate property. They were held as somebody else's property. In slavery, and even freed African Americans under the Dred Scott ruling were ruled to be never able to be citizens of the United States. That's 5/8 of the history of African Americans in the United States. For the next 100 years, 2/8 of the history, slavery was abolished, but because civil rights laws had not been passed, legally African Americans were treated different in every area of life, including housing, which is one of the principal ways that people get wealth. And it was only in the 1960s, so only in the last half century, 1/8 of American history, that African Americans were granted full legal equality. That's not the same as social or economic equality. And so, surprise, surprise, if African Americans had basically been locked out of the norms of property accumulation, buying a house where they wanted to, passing that house on to other family members, it's really difficult to accumulate wealth like other folks. You could say a very similar thing about Hispanic families. This is one of the reasons these statistics that I've signed on as a co-sponsor to Senator Booker's bill to set up a commission to look at the idea of reparations. I think how to do it is very complicated, and I'm not smart enough to figure it out. But I also feel like you can't look at statistics like these and the history we've had and say, well, there's just nothing we can do about it. Because we did corporately as a country, and the institutions and laws did a whole lot of things to create this and these disparities. And so the notion that we just can't do anything about it, or it's just the way it is, I mean, we have to figure out a way to do something about it. So I'm really glad, Ms. Kyle, that you made that, you put that data in such a stark way in your testimony. Auto enrollment. I want to ask some questions about potential for auto re-enrollment. So one of the things that we've learned over the years is that small tweaks to processes can make a big difference in retirement savings. Some people opt out of retirement early in their careers when they're young, healthy invincibles, and then they don't go back and maybe rethink that. Do we have any evidence whether or not people who opt out early are likely to reconsider the decision later in employment? And could some potential for auto enrollment every 5 years or so, with the additional element that you can then opt out if you choose to, might that help us get more people to participate in retirement savings? Maybe Ms. Lucas, I'll come to you on that.
Yes, thank you. There is evidence that, obviously inertia is a powerful force. It can be harnessed by automatic enrollment to get people into the plan and they won't opt out. And we see that, to your point about different races. It doesn't matter whether you're white, black, Hispanic, a woman, man, all incomes. People, when they're automatically enrolled, stay in plans at very high levels. For those that do opt out, re-enrollment is a very good solution because inertia will remain a factor. I remember I saw a focus group years ago of people that had been automatically enrolled into their plan, and they were asked how they liked the experience of being automatically enrolled. And one woman said, I've been working here for 10 years, and gee, time really flies. I meant to enroll in my 401k plan, and I never got around to it. So I think re-enrollment is definitely a consideration because we'll continue to see inertia of people that opted out and may ultimately have wanted to come back in but never got around to it.
Thank you. I have other questions I'll submit for the record, but thank you to the witnesses.
Senator Tuberville.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here today. I know you hit a little bit on this a few minutes ago. In 1935, we started Social Security. This is really the only retirement that a lot of people have, and for some unforeseen reason, 1983, this group up here decided we'd tax Social Security. And sounds like we're getting ready to do another tax on Social Security. We can't find enough money in federal government to run this hill up here, so we need to take from the people that's paid into retirement. Any of you want to answer this? How do we make it better? How do we make Social Security better? Because all of you in your opening statements pretty much said nobody has retirement, just a few, and the ones that have it, the corporations have wasted, and the taxpayers are having to pay the money to pay them off. So how do we make Social Security better for everybody?
Well, Senator, you're absolutely right. The Social Security system is meant to be the foundation of retirement security, the rock of certainty that Americans have in retirement. It's really become the major source of uncertainty that they have because of the status of the trust fund. We're only a little over a decade away from when the trust fund will exhaust its reserves, and I think it's incumbent upon Congress to take action to make sure that that outcome does not occur, and the sooner the better. So we at BPC have a report that we put out with the commission that I mentioned earlier that comprehensively addresses Social Security. It does call for benefit adjustments, especially for folks that can afford it at the higher end. It actually raises benefits for those who are most vulnerable at the bottom end, and then calls for some modest additional revenue increases to make sure that the trust fund is funded over time. So I would certainly encourage you to take a look at the plan, and I'd be glad to discuss it further with you and your staff.
Thank you. Thank you. And it looks like we're nearing bankruptcy in Social Security in 10, 12 years down the road. That's my understanding. Hopefully not, because people are still paying into it, and they're going to be counting on it. I can't imagine living off that small sum, but it is something. And retirement, too, is Medicare. People want to have some kind of health care, which is most valuable when you get to the point of retirement. You need Medicare. And back in President Obama's days, when we started Obamacare, they took $780 billion out of our Medicare and put in Obamacare, and it's gone. And where do you foresee Medicare going? I don't know if that's in your realm or any of your realms, if you'd answer that for me.
Well, Senator, it's not my main focus, but I do know that the trust fund for the Part A, which covers hospital insurance for that program as well, is actually in even worse shape at the moment than the Social Security trust fund that we just mentioned. It's projected in the last projections
That makes me feel good.
to deplete in 2026. So it really is an urgent issue that Congress needs to address. There are lots of proposals out there that would adjust the payment rates or the method of delivering services, as well as potentially the revenues that come into the program. There are lots of options on the table, but it has not been a priority on Congress's agenda recently. I think it needs to be in the coming years because of how soon that trust fund is also going to deplete.
Yeah, a few years ago, we had, I think, some military funds getting ready to be invested in the Chinese companies. Ms. Lucas, did the Trump administration do the right thing by pulling that back of do not invest in China with retirement funds?
Well, we see that the typical worker is in a target date fund when they are automatically enrolled, and the point of the target date funds are to be well diversified. I think any policy that impedes diversification is a consideration. And to the extent that we have policies that are interfering with diversification, I would agree that they're an issue.
Yeah, well, thank you. And just another comment about millennials. I've got two that I try to get to put into funds, and they'll come right back at me and say, Dad, at age 35, you took yours out to buy a new home. And they're right, to make a down payment. And that's what's happening. You'll have a lot of these young people that will cash out at an early age, and then 20 years later, they're looking around and going, what did I do? I don't know what we can do about that, but retirement's, with this age group coming up, as we are, the baby boomers, we're in a tough situation. A lot of people are. A lot of my buddies and friends are. But thank you for y'all being here today. It's very, very opening. I'd like to get with you on the Social Security part too. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you also to Ranking Member Burr and to all of our panelists. So I come at this from the core idea that a safe, secure retirement should be available to every American. And the sort of pillars of that historically in our country have been Social Security, savings, and pensions. So I want to dive in a little bit on this. I heard a comment, I think, about sort of bailing out the unions with the pension reform that we did in the American Rescue Plan. I just want to get to that. And Mrs. Kyle, I'm going to direct my question to you here. So the first weekend that I was a United States Senator, I went to Duluth, Minnesota, and I had a chance to visit with some Teamsters who were very worried about what was going to happen to their pensions. They were part of the Central States pension plan. They paid in, they'd done everything right, they'd saved, they'd negotiated through their union contracts a pension, and now come to find that that pension might not be there for them. Now, gratefully, thankfully, and with a lot of bipartisan work, I and many others focused on this, and we were able to get the Butch-Lewis Act passed. So Ms. Kyle, could you start just by saying, I've heard from Minnesotans, but I'd like to hear from your perspective what this has meant to protecting the pensions for the workers.
Absolutely. Once fully implemented, the American Rescue Plan Act will be life-changing for generations of workers. I don't think I can overstate the impact it will have on people's lives. In the last 6 years, I've personally heard from thousands of workers and retirees who were facing 50, 60, 70% cuts in their income and retirement due to impending solvency of their pension plans. And these were essential workers, bakers, truckers, those who worked their entire career doing difficult jobs. And now we're in a place where they could no longer work. And we're looking to make good on their deferred wages that were in the form of promised benefits. And they were worried that was all going to slip away. So, with the American Rescue Plan, those promised participant benefits are now going to be kept. And that is huge. They'll no longer miss mortgage payments or roll the dice on missed life-saving medications.
Yeah, I will never forget Vicki, the woman who I talked to in Duluth, who said to me, Tina, I don't have a plan B. If these pensions are cut that I paid into, I did everything right. And if they're not there, I don't have a plan B. But a lot of times we don't pay enough attention to what this also means for the businesses that also paid in, who did what they had agreed to do through the contracts that they had. Could you just address briefly what this means for those businesses, many of them small family-owned businesses?
Absolutely. In this, the multi-employer funding crisis, there were no bad actors. The contributing employers were giving in what they were supposed to their plans. And many of them saw their competitors potentially leave their multi-employer pension plans, and they were going to be left holding the bag. And one asset of, or one feature of the multi-employer system is that when employers start to leave, there's a chance for something called mass withdrawal, which can result in the employer having to pay exorbitant amounts in order to cover the liabilities of the plan. And so we saw a number of employers who are going to be left with what could be a significant liability for employees across the multi-employer system. And so for the most part, during the process of looking to find a solution, for multi-employer pension plans. The employers and the workers and the retirees were together in the importance of finding a solution here.
Just as I spoke with workers who were so concerned about what this was going to mean for their retirement, I spoke to family businesses that were worried about how they were going to be able to pass that business on to the next generation or potentially sell it, because that's how they were going to monetize their life's work, unable to because of this. And I just have a couple seconds left, but was this in any way a bailout of unions?
No, it wasn't. These plans are run by a board of trustees that is made up of union representatives and employers. And that board of trustees is a group of fiduciaries who are then responsible for running the plans.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Kyle. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Braun.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Question is for Mr. Cabas, and I think Senator Tuberville's already touched on a little bit. I'd like to know, we know actuarially, and we've known for a long time what's happening to Social Security. I'm just as concerned about Medicare. That's a tougher issue because of the rising costs underlying it, both drivers of our annual structural deficits. So when it comes to Social Security, I think that the variables are so simple in terms of what we need to choose from: means testing, raising the age of retirement, raising revenues, or maybe even cutting benefits. All of that would be something everyone has to contend with at in other areas of government, number one, in any business. They're tough decisions. So those four, and if you got anything else in mind, what are we going to do, and when do we need to do it? So we probably don't confront, like we're going to confront with Medicare, a precipice, a cliff, which is now a little over 5 years, when we have to do something.
Senator, you're totally right. And when we should do it, we should have done it yesterday. I mean, we are getting close to the point of insolvency of the trust fund where there will be no reserves left other than the revenue that's coming into the program, which can only fund somewhere between 75 and 80% of benefits at that point. That would be unthinkable to get to that point where retirees are seeing a 20 or 25% cut in their benefits. So all of the options that you listed, I think, do need to be on the table. That's what we did in the commission that we hosted at the Bipartisan Policy Center. It was 2 years of serious deliberations that group had, because these are tough decisions that impact real lives. But we can get to a point where we protect the most vulnerable retirees, in fact, increase their retirement security, and then make modest changes that are phased in gradually over time, like adjusting the retirement age to account for the fact that, on average, Americans are and will continue to live longer lives. Now, when we do that, I think we need to acknowledge that there are certain groups of Americans who have not seen those increases in life expectancy, particularly people of color. And in order to account for that, we can make companion changes to the program that make sure to offset those reductions in their benefits that would otherwise occur from increasing the retirement age for the whole population. But we shouldn't forestall necessary changes for the broad system just because there are some who would be adversely hurt. We should make sure that we target other policies to protect those people so that we can make the system solvent again for everybody.
So what about means testing, and what about, I think currently it's 7.65% shared by the employer, or not shared, each employer and employee, raising revenues, and then what about tailoring, reducing benefits? Are the other three out there as well? Retirement age, I think, would be the easiest one to tweak.
Yeah, so on benefits, what this commission did, one of the proposals was to make the benefit formula more progressive, and that means raising benefits modestly at the bottom end, but curbing the growth of benefits, particularly for those at the upper end, and including for things like spousal benefits, because right now, particularly well-off spouses who did not work a full career can get 50% of their spouse's benefits. So if we curtail that, particularly for spouses at the high end who really don't need those additional benefits, we can make available more resources for the population as a whole. And then revenues was a modest component of the package as well. The commission increased that 6.2% payroll tax on each side that goes to Social Security right now, gradually up to 6.7% on each side. So not a significant tax increase, but a modest one to help fund the system overall.
Thank you. I yield back the rest of my time.
Senator Hassan.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Ranking Member Burr. Thank you to all of our witnesses for being here today. Every worker should be able to save enough to cover their expenses during their retirement years. But we are here today because we know that that's not always the case. So I look forward to working with my colleagues to improve and expand access to retirement savings for all Americans. Mr. Gray, I want to start with a question to you. Following a request that the Chair and House Education and Labor Chair Bobby Scott and I made, the Government Accountability Office released a report highlighting the threat that cyber attacks pose to retirement plans. The report confirmed that cyber threats put private defined contribution retirement plans like 401ks, which are held by more than 100 million Americans, at risk, and recommends that the Department of Labor take action to address this issue. So, Mr. Gray, can you share how Fidelity works to combat the risks of cybersecurity in its client retirement plans, and what would you recommend that Congress could do to address these risks?
Senator, thank you for the question. And certainly, Fidelity views cybersecurity as one of the most paramount things that we can do, which is really all about protecting our customer data and their trust. I would say Fidelity employs some of the most sophisticated technologies and best practices that's really designed to protect the sensitive information and accounts of our customers. And this is a significant spend for us. We view this as really one of our highest priorities, and our viewpoint is we will do whatever it takes to ensure that security. To give you a few examples of kind of how we go about doing this, our cybersecurity program is ISO certified, which is really one of the highest standards that providers can use or financial services can use to validate the strength of their cybersecurity program. We actually employ 800 individuals on our cybersecurity team that come from a range of backgrounds and credentials, including law enforcement and intelligence agencies. We've built strong partnerships as well, in strategic partnerships with the FBI, Secret Service, and others to help protect our customer accounts. And we employ with our clients a number of active measures to help protect their accounts. Two-factor authentication, for example. Voice biometric, so if a Fidelity customer calls, we can authenticate them by their voice. We also have the ability to track the voice of bad actors who may be calling, trying to get access to retirement accounts. We use biometric authentication, and we work directly with our customers as well to make sure that they are aware of any cyber threats that may be faced by their participants and their plans, and to help them strengthen their cyber standards. This is a proactive approach that we take, and we are very supportive of the recommendations that were made by the Department of Labor recently, and we worked very actively with the department in the formulation of those recommendations.
Well, thank you for that, and I would look forward to further consultation about other ways Congress can move forward on helping all of our retirement plans be cyber secure. I want to turn to a different issue for all of the witnesses. As has been discussed here today, women often struggle to save enough for retirement, lagging behind their male counterparts due to a number of factors, including lower earnings, spending time away from the workplace to meet caregiving responsibilities as well. Many of those issues have been exacerbated by the pandemic, with nearly 3 million women temporarily leaving the workforce. So to each of you, and I'll ask you to be brief, how do you think Congress can help address the retirement gap for women, especially as we recover from COVID-19? And I'll start with you, Ms. Kyle.
Thank you. You know, we talked about some of the solutions here a little earlier, and I think that a focus on Social Security is really essential because that is the primary retirement vehicle for most Americans, including most women. I think a recognition that women are disproportionately in low-wage jobs and often have gaps in employment for childcare is essential. And so proposals that provide paid childcare and, paid family leave are really essential. I also think it's important to have portable retirement benefits so that when women do leave the workforce, they're able to take their benefits with them.
Yep. Thank you. And Madam Chair, I'm almost out of time. Can I ask the others to comment briefly?
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Lucas?
Thank you. According to the Retirement Confidence Survey, the women that are very affected by having low amounts of assets in retirement actually are divorced or unmarried women. According to the Retirement Confidence Survey, 38% of divorced women have less than $1,000 saved for retirement, and 42% of never married women. To your point about women who have been displaced from the workforce, we have a system already in place called catch-up contributions, and that could be something that could be leveraged for women who need to catch up because they've been displaced from the workforce in their 401k plans.
Thank you. Mr. Akabas.
Thank you. I would agree with the other witnesses. I think paid family leave is a big factor here, as well as just the access gap that we've been talking about all morning, and things like automatic enrollment that can make sure to get these workers into plans. And then finally, I would mention on Social Security, one other provision of this package that I mentioned from BPC was enhancing the survivor benefit, because often women are the ones who are the surviving spouse, and right now they only get to keep the greater of their benefit or their spouse's benefit. But unfortunately, we know that household expenses usually do not get cut in half when one spouse passes away, and so enhancing that benefit for survivors would be really important.
Great. Thank you. Mr. Gray.
Yeah, I'll just share a brief statistic. Of female workers, 75% of them told us that they would be likely to enroll in an emergency savings account if incentives were offered. And I think this Congress can act to make it easy for employers to offer incentives like in a match, an emergency savings account. I think that would go a long way.
Thank you, and thank you for your indulgence, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Rosen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate it. Thank you, Ranking Member Burr, and of course, thank you all the witnesses for being here today for your work in this area. It is critically important because we do know there are disparities in our retirement system, and we've known that since before the pandemic. Of course, retirement saving crisis in communities of color, including for Black and Latino Americans. There's a number of contributing factors, including lower lifetime earnings, lower rates of investment, lower rates of home ownership, which means that there isn't one magic solution, but it's important that we bring this up at front and center when we're examining so many inequities that the pandemic made worse, like healthcare and education. So Ms. Kyle, can you talk about how this past year's economic downturn affected inequities in retirement savings for underrepresented communities? And is there action that you think we here in Congress could take to address these disparities? How can we help maximize the ability for these groups to catch up?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the pandemic worsened many of the inequalities that we see in retirement savings for people of color and low-wage workers. And, you know, I think that efforts towards emergency savings are really essential in order to ensure that people of color are able to pull money in when they need it and not pull out of their retirement accounts, which they often don't have. I'll also reiterate, you know, Senator Kane brought up the fact that many of the inequalities and disparities we see among Black and brown people is related to the overall racial wealth gap. And so policies that help close that racial wealth gap, I think will have a huge impact on retirement savings as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I want to build on what Senator Hassan said and about this too, catching up. Building on inequities, because one thing that I hope that comes out of this pandemic is a broader understanding of family caregiving. Many workers, disproportionately women, have to leave the workforce mid-career in order to take care of their children or aging relatives. You know, I actually experienced that myself when I left work to care for my parents and in-laws towards the end of their lives in different health journeys. And far too many people have to really make that impossible decision between staying in the workforce and leaving to care for family members. And of course, as like I said, Senator Hassan talked about, that takes a back seat. Saving for retirement takes a back seat to some of those things. So women, I just want to reiterate, we know they have to be able to catch up and we'll continue to work with you on that. And speaking of catching up, so many women, a lot of folks, they work in small businesses. And so I know we're here today with some large employers, but small businesses, how can we help them, help their employees to save? They don't have large HR departments. They may struggle to offer a wide range of products or even give them at all. And just we need to be able to enable our small businesses to give those resources. So, Mr. Gray, could you talk about any possible policy changes that you think Congress might enhance that could help small businesses, those businesses with 500 employees and under, and even our micro businesses with maybe 50, 10 employees? How do they help their employees save for retirement?
Yes, Senator, thank you for the question. I think small businesses and making sure that we close the coverage gap, incent those small businesses to offer a plan, and also incent them to offer automatic enrollment is really critical to addressing the points that you've raised. When you look at automatic enrollment is used very heavily among large employers. But small businesses, like businesses with 50 employees and less, typically only about 10 to 12% of those employers will automatically enroll. If I look at clients or businesses with 2,500 employees or greater, that number starts to become more like 60 or 70% using automatic enrollment. I think that's critical that Congress find a way to incent those small businesses to be able to automatically enroll. And part of the challenge has simply been a matter of cost for those businesses. Right. When upon automatically enrolling, the employer then, the small business owner, now has the cost of a match. So if steps can be taken on that, I think they go a long way. And I'll also quickly comment on pooled employer plans again. I think that is an excellent opportunity because it allows those businesses to offload the administrative duties, focus on their business and their employees, and trust Fidelity or others to administer the plan for them.
And Senator, if I could just note, adding on what Mr. Gray said on that automatic enrollment piece, there is legislation that was introduced in the last Congress by Senators Young, Booker, and Jones and Cotton that would address this issue with the safe harbor for automatic enrollment to give small employers more flexibility in terms of how much they can afford to contribute to the retirement plans and still incentivizing them to make that employer match, but also recognizing that some can't and still encouraging them to use automatic enrollment. So I'd encourage you to take a look at that and be happy to discuss it with you further.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I also think for our small businesses, those administrative costs, having that software, all of those things, they may not have a robust IT department or know how to do that. So being able to pool and partner with larger groups or companies, I think will be key to success. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Burr, do you have any additional questions?
Madam Chairman, I'd just end with how I started. I want to thank all four witnesses for their willingness to be here today, for the knowledge that you've been able to instow on us, and more importantly, for the suggestions that you've provided us as to ways that we can enhance retirement savings in this country. I thank all four of you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I do have one additional comment and question. The shift from traditional defined benefit plans like pensions to defined contribution plans like 401k plans means savings for retirement is more complicated for participants. Workers have to act as their own financial advisor, their own investment manager, their own actuary, which is a daunting task when you are raising children or focused on your own career, especially when you're struggling to make ends meet at home. But even when people are able to plan a TIND, we know from the latest retirement confidence survey released by EBRI, only half of workers have tried to calculate what they will need for retirement. That's a number that has essentially not changed since 1999, despite initiatives to improve financial planning. And even when people do plan ahead, their plans to retire can be upended by forces unseeable like a pandemic. So, Ms. Lucas, I wanted to just ask you to comment. What can we do to help the families trying to chart a path to financial security in retirement?
I think there's two things that we see about people who are actually living in retirement. There are two groups that have almost the identical amount of assets, and it's not that much. But one is we call struggling retirees that have unmanageable debt, and their retirement is very constrained and difficult. The other, again, very similar in all aspects except they don't have the unmanageable debt. We call them the just getting by. And that sounds negative, but they actually are able to piece together a pretty secure retirement because they're not struggling with debt. The other group is what we call the long-term secure retirees, and those are people that have some source of guaranteed income. And whether it's a defined benefit plan, an annuity, retiree medical, they have some greater sense of security because they're not completely relying on their own nest egg. And those people feel less constrained about spending. They feel more confident about spending, and their the retirement they describe is much more comfortable overall.
Okay, thank you. Did you want to?
Senator, I would just add on the financial literacy or capability point that you raised that I think that financial literacy in general is important, but we shouldn't overstate necessarily the ability of teaching a high schooler what they should be doing 7 years down the road to save for their retirement 50 years down the road. I think a much more effective place to go is what we call just-in-time interventions. So when those decision points are being made, when people are enrolling in the plans, when they are making decisions about their retirement income, for drawing down their retirement accounts or for annuities, how can we help them with the information that they need and the structure that they need to make those decisions? Social Security claiming is another really important one where people often make those decisions without a whole lot of knowledge about the benefits, decisions that they're making that will impact them for the rest of their life. If they claim at age 62, they'll get a significantly reduced benefit for their entire lifetime. And so what types of information and nudges can we provide people at those ages so that they make more informed decisions for their own retirement security?
I agree that financial literacy is a lifetime issue, but we certainly have a lot of young kids today who don't even have the basics. As my colleague Senator Burr referred to needing to know how to balance a checkbook, basic things, or what happens when you charge a bunch of stuff on your iPhone and have to pay the bill later, small things. But again, I do think it is a lifetime learning. Just in time is often as important. That will end our hearing today, and I want to thank all of my colleagues, all of our witnesses, Ms. Lucas, Mr. Covet, Ms. Kyle, Mr. Gray. Thank you for joining us today for this really important discussion about how we can help shore up our nation's retirement security and make sure our families are prepared for the future. For any senators who wish to ask additional questions, questions for the record will be due in 10 business days on Thursday, May 27th at 5 p.m. The hearing record will also remain open until then for members who wish to submit additional materials for